Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. It's June 6th at 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us. Please remember to share our station. Remind your friends they can hear us on TuneIn Radio or on the internet at ucy.tv/AOF. We really appreciate your listenership and sharing this radio station. And if you can afford a few beans, please make a contribution on our webpage. It always helps make our station better. So I've been off the air for a couple of days. I had a few pre-recorded interviews, which I really hope you enjoyed. I thought my conversation with Jose yesterday was pretty timely. I really appreciated his time. And I was Dr. Goffman is my professor at school this term, and I'm actually learning quite a lot in that class about why we're in the place we're in and how the EPA can lie to us. I just went through democracy school through the it's called Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and I think I'm going to set aside a whole day to go through what I went through. And it's going to pop up. What I learned there is going to pop up from here on out. I'm going to actually get much more involved in this idea. Today's guest is Matt Hulstrunk, a citizen scientist who's been with us a few times, and I really appreciate him coming back. He spends his time analyzing EPA data. I thought my interest in IRS code was interesting, but this one is pretty interesting. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
You're welcome, Lonnie. Good to be here.
I'm glad I'm not the only nerd on the planet that likes to read data, because one of my things, this is how I got into doing the business. I worked for a tax attorney, and I used to sit and read the IRS code because I was like fascinated how it worked, like how it all went down. So it's pretty interesting. We have had a lot of spikes in radioactive contamination. I have been following your page on Facebook. And you post readings. I guess you got a mega Geiger, right? And why don't you explain what you've been up to and the spikes and what you've been seeing? Because I know there's a lot of chitter chatter about how freaked out we are and it's super high. And let's have a conversation about where we're really at with these levels and how we really need to look at this. So,
okay. So just within the past year, I purchased one of the higher end Geiger counters that are on the market. It's a Mazur PRM 9000, which has a 2-inch pancake detector on the back, which is right up there with all the really good high-end detectors that are out there. So it's really sensitive. It measures everything for me, gamma, beta, and alpha, and it logs it for me. And now I've been able to pull the data off and do graphing on it. And my game plan with the thing was to check the EPA's RadNet monitor here in Corvallis and see if I can produce a graph that matches what they're putting out. And if I can, then it's a good check that, okay, they seem to be doing their job over there. And if I can't, then there's something up. And I will say that I'm about 1 mile downwind of the OSU reactor here on a summer day. So the wind blows from there to here.
Wow.
So my detector is, my detecting ability, I think, here is really comparable to that one there. And I just did my first 2-month graph to check the data, and I got to say that the graphs looked amazingly similar. It didn't look like there was anything except for the EPA has a tendency when their monitors to go above a set scale, they just don't give the data. And so some of that showed up on their graph, which didn't show up on my graph. My graph actually showed the data, and it didn't appear to me to be that high. So I'm not sure what the difference is there, but it was a good check on them, and I'm feeling pretty good about what they're doing right now. I can't say about what they did in the past, but right now it seems like it's pretty good.
You mean that they're actually telling us exactly what the data is? Well, that's because I think we have a steady amount. Like, it's a steady amount of data. That's the thing. Like, last week, I saw a lot of chatter on, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, you posted a super high spike in Corvallis. Like 374, was it?
It was in the 360s, and that happened the morning after the Hanford tunnel collapse.
Wow.
And so I was, at the time I was concerned. What am I getting here? Could this be from that? And then I think it was 6 hours later. There was a woman over in Bend who's got the same instrument that I have, and she got a spike too at that time. 6 hours later, which doesn't necessarily mean the flow is from here to there. It could have been coming down from the north, but the winds didn't quite seem to be in the right direction for me to be getting the reading from Hanford here. That would be sort of like a winter southeasterly flow, which it seemed like it was more variable up there, and sort of heading a little more north than south.
Well, you never know, though. A little swirl of it might have just, like, hit the jet stream or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing about how it goes. We really don't know, but it does seem to make logical sense that something happened there that would make it. You know what I mean? They had. I mean, that's not a strange anomaly that they had the collapse and then boom, all of a sudden we had this spike. But as you and I were talking about, and as Dr. John Goffman wrote many times, low-level radioactive contamination causes much more harm in the long run. You get these huge spikes, but they don't linger. I mean, obviously, if they do linger, you die, right? Like, if we had that high 374 for a long time, lots of us would be getting sick pretty soon.
Yeah, that would hurt you pretty quick.
Right. But that's not what happens. What happens is we're all exposed because of the nuclear bombings, the uranium mining, the negligence of the storage facilities, the leaking, the single seal tanks, Sellafield, Fukushima, Hanford. Need I go on? I mean, do I need to memorize every single nuclear facility that's causing the planet distress? All of that cumulative, we're seeing what's happening. Like, I saw a story that CBS News did about, we don't know what's killing the seals and the birds, and these just shouldn't be interspecies, and what's causing it to to die. And I'm like, the common denominator is 100,000 tons of radioactive waste for almost 7 years now. How about that every single day? And 9 million liters into Sellafield every single day. How about that? I mean, just those two facilities alone, somebody in the nuclear industry really ought to have Nuremberg trials for their denial. And the world's government to deny this and to pretend like it's no big deal. While we have journalists, educated people scratching their heads going, well, we can't really prove it's coming from Fukushima.
Yeah, the beauty of latency for them, it can hit and it can be 2 to 60 years before the cancers develop, And,
yeah. Well, I think Helen Caldicott says 4 to 80.
Yeah,
that's what he says. So I guess 2 to 60, 4 to 80, probably all similar. I mean, this is the reality. And how many miscarriages, how many stillbirths, how many small anomalies that children have had to suffer and large anomalies that children have had to suffer? How much schizophrenia, how much diabetes is it going to take before these people refuse to see what is causing it? I mean, blaming the victim, I'm so over blaming the victim. We look at people's family like, oh, you got schizophrenia, like it must be in your genetics. Actually, it's not in our genetics. It was put into our genetics by the nuclear industry. That's how it was put there.
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, you never know what gene's going to be spliced when a gamma ray comes through.
I'll tell you, Dr. Goffman did study that, and there are certain isotopes you can pretty much identify will give you specific kinds of things. They go to different organs. We all kind of know that 6 years after I mean, Matt, 6 years ago, were you testing radioactive contamination in the air?
6 years ago? Yeah. Was I testing?
Yeah, before Fukushima.
I was clueless 6 years ago as to radiation. It wasn't even on my radar screen.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think. In my wildest nightmares, I had no reason nor desire to go into the nuclear field. I just, why go there? It's such a complicated beast. There's so much political spin put on it that I just knew that it was bad. I knew nuclear weapons were bad. I knew nuclear power was bad. That's all I knew, and that's all I thought that was all I had to know.
And you figured that the EPA and the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, was keeping it all a good eye on everything and making sure nothing got way out of hand, even though it had that potential. That's what I thought.
Yeah, well, I've always, I sort of have come to a point where I look at all government entities with eyes wide open now, and not a very trusting view to what they do.
Well, now me
and
too.
That may be cynical, but I think that's reality. I think it's just. I now realize what the hell is going on in the world, and money is controlling everything. And if they can lie to you to make more money, they will, and they do, and the politicians will fall right in line right now behind them.
But you know why? Because it's perfectly legal. Because this is what I learned in democracy school. Because of the Commerce Clause in our country, we as citizens do not have as much authority. Corporations actually have more authority. The only right we have is to interfere in the permit processes. That's it. We do not have the right to say no to them. The only way and they're winning this across the country, the only way they're working it is towns and cities are getting together to get ordinances passed to say that they have a legal Bill of Rights, that they have a right, that they are an actual entity, and they're getting their state governments to pass that, to give them the authority to say no to businesses. Because until you can say no to a business on a legal aspect, the nuclear industry can. This is why the Price-Anderson Act isn't so completely outrageous to people in business. They're like, well, so a few people get away with it, but you're not going to stop the business. The only way that the
Yeah.
business will stop is if they want to stop. So then, see, this is what they're doing is they're forcing the so-called market choice, which is like them driving off the cliff before, 3/4 of us have to be driven off the cliff before they decide. And they may never decide. Look what they've done to the Native American Indians. I
Yeah.
mean, they're driving them right. Literally, it's genocide. It's a slow, silent genocide. They're not openly murdering them. But with 15,000 uranium mines on Native American lands, really?
Yeah.
Open uranium mines, unclosed, still unearthed, unless people have been able to go and they're not even allowed to go through and close them up because it's not their property. They don't have the rights to them because of the Commerce Clause. The government came in and said, we're taking this.
Right. They own all of it. They own all
That's
of
what they did. That is exactly what they did at Standing Rock.
Yep.
And people
Yep.
were shocked. And we were all like, how can our government allow it? Well, I'll tell you what. When you read this, this organization that put on this school, Democracy School, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and it's a book, they wrote it with Richard Grossman, who I understand has passed away, but they put together basically clips to explain how it is of our government. So our Constitution is based on English law that was given to William Penn and the Charter of King Charles II of England. And this is where it comes from.
Right.
So in the meantime, we have to at least pay attention. And that's what you're doing. You're paying attention.
Yeah.
I want to get into this with you. I can get onto a tangent about this Democracy School, but I really want to stick to this idea that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
We're often seeing there's a lot of conflict between these spikes in radiation and, like, I don't exactly trust readings that tell me that there's 1,200 CPMs in Chicago. I'll be very frank with you. That is a way high reading. That's above the government standard of alarm. So,
yes. You'd think it would be until you research their monitors, and you look at what they have versus what, let's say, I have. See, I have a little handheld unit here, and it depends on if it's gonna read anything that's floating in the air. It depends on stuff just floating by. And that depends on the wind speed. And so if the wind speed picks up, I can see my monitor picks up too, because more particles are passing into the chamber, right? More particles are passing by me and passing into the chamber. So what the EPA does on all of their stuff, in order to get that high degree of sensitivity, they have these huge fans that suck air into their monitor. And it's like being in a hurricane. And so their monitors are going to be reading substantially higher than anything anybody has on their handheld. And the key here is to be able to, but that's okay. I don't mind them doing that. In fact, I like them doing that because it just shows, they're able to detect things a lot quicker. The highs a lot better than I am, and but also I've come to realize that I can check their graphs with my data, because graphs you can adjust. You can adjust scales on it, the height and everything, and a lot of other different parameters on it, and so I can get mine to look very similar to theirs, even though they're a factor of 100. A factor of 100 times difference in values. That doesn't matter. I just am concerned in the shape of the graph that comes out. What is the shape? Is it doing peaks at this date? Is it doing valleys on this date? And I look at theirs and I look at mine now, and I do see those. I do see there's a lot of that they're lining up. And I'm only talking about 2 months here worth of data, so I can't really talk about older stuff.
Yeah,
that happened.
but you had it when Hanford was going on, right?
I did, yes, I did. And I really didn't see, I sort of saw a little bit of an increase after that, but not a big increase, you know.
Was there a difference in your data and the data of the EPA?
Well, you know, I can compare my data really good with Corvallis. But when you start trying to compare data here to a site 200, 300 miles away in Richland.
Yeah, I get you. That's a little different. So in Corvallis, thank you for your scientific mind. You can tell I seriously do not have one. So thank you for tolerating my idiotic questions.
That's okay.
But let's ask about the Corvallis one then. Around the time that Hanford happened, did they have the same kind of data that you did?
Well, I would say the data almost matches exactly from my graphs. From looking at my graph versus their graph, they're really, really close. And they have, the thing is, mine, I don't pull any hours out. If my data goes high, I don't pull that hour out. I leave it in so I can see it. The EPA, they are required by the Department of Energy to pull data when it gets above a certain point. They will not allow the public to see it because they don't want to scare the people. And I'm talking I'm not talking like double, triple, you know, the normal value. I'm talking probably factors of 10, 100, you know, like the big spikes I get.
Yeah.
Somehow, and I really don't understand how they can get giant spikes over an hour average. That to me doesn't make sense, because I can get a big spike, and yet my average still only goes up just a little bit because the spike is short duration. And yet they seem to get some really high ones that are averaged over the hour really, really high. So there's still something here I'm missing. I haven't quite figured that out. I've been thinking about this for a long time.
So explain that to me again. I don't quite understand what. Okay, well, first let's start with this premise. Sure. What's the average count here where you're at in Corvallis? What do you say for the average?
In Corvallis?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an average over the 2 months that I've been here. It's averaging in the low 30s. Could be 30, 31, 32, somewhere around that range.
The low 30s?
That's not the low. That's an average. So they sort of call that, some people call it background. I don't know 30s? If I would call it background.
You know how much it is here in Eugene? 30
CPM, yeah.
When I tested with the Geiger counter that Mimi Gurman sent me last year so we could go do the Hanford action, my average, because I'm talking about hers because she has a really good Geiger counter. I have a crappy one that'll give me a reading, but hers is really good. Our average here in Eugene. Okay. Well, it's a really good one.
It's a Mazur PRM 9000. That's the exact one that I have, and I wanted to. Yeah.
They're pricey. They're pricey. Those are kind of expensive.
Yeah.
This is why people don't have them. They're when I looked, it was like $679.
Yep.
So it was all expensive. So, but when I tested here in Eugene, it was at average 11, 12. I kept it for about 2 weeks, and one day it went up to 17, 18. It spiked at 24, went back down to 17, 18. But it averages here most of the time. I've never seen it go over 24. So wow. You guys are at 33?
Well, 30, 31. I think right now it's at 32.
Oh man, I would love to retest. Now this was last year. I would love to retest right now because of what happened in Hanford. I think that what's going on in Hanford, Matt, is not over. I don't believe that the exposure to the air is finished with that collapse. Them just throwing a tarp over it, filling it up with dirt and putting a tarp over it is not fixing the problem when you're talking plutonium. That doesn't work.
Yeah, there's a lot of...
Am I wrong on that? Can you cover up plutonium with a tarp and stop the radioactivity?
Well, you can, with enough dirt on it, you're gonna stop a lot of the gamma from escaping. I think that was the big thing. And also they have, that plutonium when it when it half-lifes down, it turns into americium 241, which is used in the smoke detectors. Really high alpha producing.
Well, what's its half-life? Isn't plutonium half-life like something like 24,300, 400 years?
It's pretty long.
I mean, so we're not even looking at its half-life yet. I mean, human history is going to be long gone. I mean, unless we, honestly, this is my belief. Like, I cannot see a way out of this unless the only way we're going to see it is if Gaia erupts, the planet breaks apart, and the oceans swallow all of these nuclear facilities. And that would have to mean most of North America.
Yeah.
And large portions of Canada, as a matter of fact, and probably large portions of Europe. I mean, do you see a way out of it? I mean, I'm much more, as you can tell, much more emotional about it. So, what do you think of it, like long term? You're kind of the science brain. What do you think?
The long term. This is not a good long term plan at all. Totally not. It's probably the worst thing that man could have done for himself and for the planet was to follow this when there was a lot of people saying it was the wrong move. You know, Einstein did not believe that nuclear was the way to go.
Right.
You know, he sort of was the guy who invented the whole theory on that. You know, and just about all of the scientists who were rational and not caught up in the money game of it believed it was the wrong way to go. And about the only one that I can recall that thought it was a good way to go was Edward Teller, who wanted to, of course, he wanted to take hydrogen bombs and use it to, make canals and make ports up in Alaska. And, God.
You know, every time I hear his name, I see his image from a documentary that I got. It's called Half-Life. It's about the Marshall Islands, and it had clips of Teller with the admiral who oversaw the program. I do not know the guy's name. I should, though. But it was Army clips of them. You know how they took pictures of themselves while this was all going on. You could see the madness in their eyes, the power, lust, and thirst when these bombs went off. No regard for the people. I mean, absolutely no regard for their own soldiers, much less the people that they were affecting, whose lands they destroyed and culture they destroyed, and all the billions of animals and the future life that they caused. I mean, we really seriously are. The world is. This is why I think it's extremely important for us to decide that we as a human species are going to rekindle our humanity, remain happy, like really refuse. Happiness really is resistance, because if we refuse to let it get to us, we will find the solution. I don't believe that we can not. I believe that we can stop this somehow.
I think I agree with you there, Lonnie. I think it's just going to depend on man's development of his mind, basically, and I think that is the key. And it's not necessarily developing the mind to make a machine to do the work. It's developing the mind to a point where the mind itself is able to transform things. I mean, a lot of the Eastern religions show that things that we think are impossible are possible, and it's just a matter of getting into an enlightened space enough to be able to use that power in a positive way. So I think man can do it in the long run, but he certainly needs to concentrate on it and not get distracted. And right now we're being distracted by my God, by so many different things, so many different days. It's almost, it is.
Well, not
It
only
gets
that,
overwhelming.
we we
Overwhelming.
have the same people who brought us the nuclear destruction now bringing us genetically modified foods,
Yeah.
AI. I mean,
Yeah.
listen to First Cup, Before the First Cup, the show that's on before mine. I listen to her. Actually, I get backed up. There's two shows that I listen to. Well, three. Well, anyways, there's several shows on this station that I'm sort of like, you can't get the information anywhere else. But
Right.
Jules talks about how the AI, like the biochipping and the DNA messing up and the space programs but they're all the same people that brought us the nuclear industry because they have lost their humanity.
Yeah. It's interesting. Monsanto and a lot of those companies were involved in the Manhattan Project.
Yes,
The actual
it's the
development of the
same
bomb.
people.
Same
Yes.
people. Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. Unless we're going to really figure out, and this is why I like this idea of the democracy school, because guess what? We can stop them we can use the Commerce Clause and we can get engaged in how, because we are living in the culture of this, the whole royal, the way they did everything in those days. We're living on our constitution in our culture, at least in the Western world, at least in the United States. Our constitution is modeled after the King James, the British version of government. That's how it was created. And this is how the Commerce Clause gets around all these people. This is why these little townships can't stop fracking, because they have no rights as a community. This is really amazing technical law, but guess what? Like, the way we're going to get around them is for us to engage and create a Bill of Rights and get engaged and work at a state level so that our state legislators acknowledge our cities as equal entities to corporations, and we have a right to do more than just object to their permits, that we have a right to say, our land has a right to exist the way it is. Our air has the right to exist the way we want it. It's ours. You cannot come in here and tell us where to put your stuff. You cannot come in and say for commerces that we're harming you. So,
yeah.
I don't know.
That's a model. That's a model that a lot of the recent leftist South American governments have embraced. Venezuela, Ecuador. There are a couple of countries down there that have basically thrown out the whole idea of capitalism and tried to bring the people on board with all new constitutions and a whole new way of looking at the world. And I think they're on the right path. And we are still stuck in the imperialistic mode up here.
Well, frankly, it's the reason they're having overthrows and shortages. I mean, the government, our CIA has infiltrated every single one of those governments and caused political unrest. And frankly, I really believe the CIA even gave Chavez cancer. Like, I don't think he just got it. I think it was given to him because he went very quickly. Boom. But that's also what we have to live with, though. See, this is the thing. Like, here in our country, if we start at home and start pushing back, like this idea, check this out. Our Pentagon can't find 10 trillion with a T-R-I, trillion. That's a lot.
They know where it went. They just don't want to tell you.
Our deficit. Our deficit is $540 million. That's our deficit, right?
Yeah.
If they could have found one of those trillions, we'd have a surplus, and they could still have lost 9 trillion. So for the president to be asking for an increase while we have a secret government who openly tells us we're spending $10 trillion, something is wrong. Look, if that's what they're doing, we ought to have a lot more peace on the planet. The reason we don't have peace is because they are working on behalf of multinational corporations, and that's because of the way our Constitution is written. That's considered our vital interest. This is why Humpty Dump Trump, thinks that he can run our country like a corporation and leave all these diplomatic positions completely even unnamed. I mean, it's outrageous, the amount of destruction that he's doing in 4 months to the very structure of world peace right now. In my view, a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous president. And our Senate and our Congress ought to be standing up right now and invoking the clauses that says he's a complete threat to our country.
Yeah, but they're not.
Nope. But you know why they're not?
not.
Because we're not pressuring them. If we told them to. If they got 3 million people calling their offices in the next week going, what are you guys doing? You know what? Every Republican would join on, because what they want is to be reelected.
Well, that's if the voting system was, on the up and up. I think it's a lot of deception going on on a lot of different levels, and I think the voting arena is one of them. I looked into that. I got into actually the whole voting snafu way long before I got into the nuclear thing, and there was a lot of people pointing in the direction of voting manipulation through, especially those electronic machines that were going on at the time. Back in the 2000s, even before that, people really didn't start getting aware of it until the 2000 election, and then maybe the 2004 election. And the more I looked into that, the more I saw, well, those voting machines are obviously, they've obviously been built, since they're not showing the codes. They refuse to show that the codes that are in those things they've obviously been built to manipulate votes. And there's been a lot put out there by a lot of different people proving that, or at least showing a lot of damning evidence that that's the case. And to be honest with you, even in this last election with that whole thing going on when Bernie had such a huge support on the West Coast here, going against in the primaries against Hillary, and yet they were always neck and neck, always so close, and then after the votes came in, we see what, all of these Bernie supporters who only supported Bernie because of his ideals, you can't tell me that half of them didn't vote for Jill Stein in the Green Party, because her ideals were almost exactly the same as Bernie, and yet it came out that the Green Party got only 4% of the state vote.
I really appreciate you talking about that, because that's true.
So to me, that's almost, and I got to tell you, I've talked to a lot of people about who they voted for. A lot of the Bernie supporters. Who did you vote for? And there's a lot of them in this. Around, even in the rural area here. I'm not talking in Corvallis, which is pretty damn progressive. I'm talking in, out in the outskirts, and those people are a lot smarter than you think. And a lot of them voted for Jill Stein. A lot of them did. In fact, the majority of them that I talked to. And so it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's
that
that
would happen.
Look, it's not just doesn't make sense. It's evidence that there is election fraud going on, and has been for a long time. We've known that. So the question is, when are Americans going to take this seriously and demand an end to these machines? The reason we bought the machines was to make somebody very rich. You know what Greg Palast reports? That the machines in the United States are so outdated they can't replace the parts, kind of like our nuclear facilities. And so it's so ironic, because this election, Greg Palast showed, I think it was Greg Palast's reporting that I read, that verifiable that in California there were uncounted votes by the time of the convention. There were verifiable reports that votes were shredded, that in New York almost 2 million registered voters who were very prone to vote for Bernie in the primary were scrubbed from the voter rolls. The Democrats did to the Democrats did to Bernie what the Republicans do to Ron Paul in there every time he ran. And this is the dirtiness of our election process. It gets away with it because most Americans who hear about this never call the registrar of voters, don't call their elected officials and demand a real election and getting rid of those machines. I mean, the machines, I personally advocate for getting rid of the machines. I want to have a purple finger. You know what I mean?
I would, yeah. Oh, totally. I think hand counting is the way to go. I mean, it doesn't take that much to do that.
It doesn't.
Very simple.
Every real democracy does hand counting. And the one thing that Greg Palast showed in this last election, these machines are in such bad shape, you can actually manipulate them from like 30 miles away now.
Oh, yeah.
You don't even have to be around the corner. So it's not uncommon. And this is why the election results were such a shock, because Hillary thought she had bought this one, man. They had taken care of Bernie, and I think they thought Trump was just a big joke, and they were going to win hands down, and then bada bing. Old Trumpy had friends at the Kremlin. And what Greg Palast's work shows is that they didn't steal big numbers. They stole a half a vote for Clinton, a half a vote for Clinton, a little half a vote for Clinton. And all these little half votes added up to 1 or 2% in these tight races.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story about something that happened to me, probably 10 years ago while I was working over at Hewlett Packard in Corvallis here. So they were getting in. That was when Hewlett Packard was starting to. They had sent all their manufacturing facility overseas, and they had a lot of office space that was opening up in their buildings. They had 11 buildings over there at the site. And one of the buildings in particular is a big one, a fairly new one, and they were trying to get clients in. And they got this one client in called International Gaming Systems, which I had never really heard of, but I was in charge of working on the project of getting them in place in the building. And so one day I was over there, and I was looking around. They were showing me around the place and sort of describing the various things that they had over there and what they needed and what they wanted. And I was trying to put an estimate together on what the whole thing was going to be worth. And there was a locked room, and I'm like, what's in this little locked room? It looks like a high security, it's key carded, what's is that an IT room or something? He goes, oh no, that's one of our secret rooms here. And I'm like, well, what does it do? He goes, well, hardly anybody can get into that room, but what it does, it allows us, and International Gaming Systems was part of a company that makes roulette wheels, the electronic roulette wheels at the casinos, right? But another thing they also make is voting machines. So it's the same software and the same machines that are being used here. So he said, in that room, if you can get into that room, you can literally plug into any casino and any of our machines that we have in the casinos and change the codes and the data and how that thing operates, how it puts out, how much it holds, how much it lets. He said it's quite amazing. And not too many people knew about that. And it hit me. I was like, my God, if they have that room to do that, how could that be any different than the
voting machines? This is how simple it is to do the voting machines. They get in there in the locked room, spend a few minutes, clickety-click, done, go home and have a drink, baby. Mission accomplished.
And I was sort of blown away by the whole thing. And I don't even know if they're still there. I think they bailed out of that building. I'm not sure they're still over there. But,
so Matt, are you not struck by the irony of that happening 10 years ago, and here you are now 10 years later, measuring radioactive contamination, understanding that in your little neck of the woods, the average is 30 plus, which I find outrageous. And you're measuring data, comparing it with a pretend nuclear power facility in Corvallis, who they say has no radioactivity. Have you done any kind of a neighborhood study to talk to people about their illnesses and things like that? Do you know of anybody in Corvallis doing those kinds of studies?
I do not. I do not.
That would be really
I've actually done some plant surveys over there around that building. I usually do them in the spring when the dandelions start coming out, because they seem to be really sensitive to all this kind of stuff. And I look and I look, and sometimes I can look all day long and not find a single odd mutation in a dandelion, and then one day I get over in front of their radiation center over there, and I look and I'm like, holy crap, there's about a half dozen of them right here in front of me. And
right in front of their building? In front of their building.
In front of around the side of the building, in the back of the building. I went all the way around it looking, and I found that stuff basically in the downwind positions of the building. So the downwind positions would be a summertime downwind position and a wintertime downwind position, and that was where the vast majority of the ones I was finding showed up. And they were really superbly mutated dandelions too. I mean, stuff that I was like, wow, I have never seen one quite like that before. And I took a lot of pictures that day. I posted them.
I saw that. One actually looks like the center, instead of looking like a circle, it looks like a long French loaf of bread, sort of bending backwards. It kind of like went, but long. It looked like a crescent roll with petals sticking around it. You know what I mean? It was.
Yeah. Yep.
It was really shocking, actually. And the way the stem went was all wiggly. The stem didn't go straight up. The stem was a wiggly worm.
Yeah, twisted, really twisted bad, and after that, I poked all around. I did find quite a high ratio of bad mutations over on the Oregon State campus, upwind or downwind of that reactor that I saw. And I can go elsewhere in this town. I can go into some down or upwind positions of that, and it's very hard to find mutations on the upwind positions. So it's people are telling me, oh well, it's the Roundup and it's this and that. Well, that Roundup may have something to do with it, but it's not the trigger. It's not the triggering device. It may cause these plants to be more sensitive than to something happening, just like the human body. When they put GMO and all sorts of weird stuff, all these chemicals into our bodies, and then a little trigger of radiation will set something off, and
exactly
mutations form, cancers form.
Which is why you're the first person that really interrelates our long-term exposure, low-level radioactivity, to a lot of things in our body that I've met, Matt. Like, you're the first one that really has connected with that and said that, besides myself. I think the one very big success of the Disney program was to convince everyone that the long-term exposure to the constant bombing of the planet by the military of all these countries, testing all this nuclear bombing, that we were perfectly safe, had no effect on us whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, and it was hard to find initially, unless you got hit with 600 rads or something. It was hard to see the damage right away because of the latency. It didn't happen.
Well, not only that, we now have all these chemicals mixing in that we can point the finger at, so it's quite convenient. Yeah. They laid the background, literally they did a background of radiation so that we now accept the idea that there's a background radiation. Like, that's a ridiculous statement.
and they can put out all these chemicals that are out. They can come up with all these new chemicals. They're coming up with them constantly, and they're okaying, the EPA okays constantly all these weird chemicals that are mildly cancerous. They have been shown to produce cancer. Well, you start piling those one on top of the other, and then you take the radiation and put that in the mix, and my God, it's no wonder
it's going to get way worse under Scott Pruitt. In my class last week, a girl brought in an article or a week before last, that said Scott Pruitt had approved a chemical that our government paid 4,000 studies to do to show that it was harmful. He approved of it finally. That was one of his first things he did.
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's all driven by money. If they can make money on that chemical, producing it and selling it, and if people will buy it, and it still sort of blows me away when I see somebody out there spraying Roundup on their lawn,
My landlord.
It's like,
my landlord does that. He's out my front yard. He does not put it into my backyard. Ask him not to. But I do have to say, when in the winter, now you said the downwind, the dandelions from the downwind from the winter were the ones that were mutated?
Both directions, both in the downwind, both downwind positions, both summer and winter. They're usually opposite because it switches. Summer pattern is usually a westerly wind that blows, and then in the winter we have more of an offshore or an easterly flow that blows. So it's in both those directions. And here with the way the Coriolis effect works with the atmosphere, the Ferrel cell that we have here, it'll actually push everything into the northwest southeast direction. So the north gets pushed by that air cell movement. So those two effects really operate to make the wind pattern here. Northwest in the summer, southeast in the winter.
Now I want to ask you about the the levels of radioactive contamination, the air pockets that we see around the country, and these various sites that we've seen around.
Yep.
I mean, people go to the EPA site. There's all these different graphs that we're looking at. Like when I go to the EPA site and I pull up gamma, to me it looks like it's reading in the thousands. Is that thousands?
It is, because of the volume of air they pull through the machine.
Oh, okay, but that's
if you
not
turn that fan. If they turn their fan off, the readings would come way down. It probably wouldn't be quite as low as a really good handheld, because they have really good sensitive
monitors and equipment.
In there. Yeah, the components in there are really high end. They're military grade, so they're really high end. So they would still be reading more. They're just more sensitive. But when you give it that airflow, that's when it really, you get those.
So what do you think the airflow factor affects? So it's not 3,000 counts per minute. It's what? It's not 2,500. What would it be? Like 250? 3? I mean, we're not really getting readable monitoring from the EPA then. Because why don't they just give us a real reading? Just put up a Geiger counter and stop sucking it all in. Like, just tell us what's in the air.
Yeah, I mean, my whole basis, what I've come to conclude is that you really can't compare. You can't compare readings from one site to another. You can't compare readings from one type of detector to another. You have to stay with one system and get to know it, and get to use it, get to know it, and you have to look at it, and you have to realize what's going on with the highs and the lows. And if you just blindly try to compare without really understanding that it's not really how high it goes or how low it goes, but it's the shape of that graph that you get when you graph it in a yearly look. That's what you want to see.
How can you say that the amount doesn't matter? I don't understand what you're talking about.
Well, the amount doesn't matter because there are so many different type of detectors. You know, some have a pancake detector, some have a tube detector, and the tube detectors will only get a quarter of what mine picks up. Mine has that pancake detector, so it gets readings that maybe 4 times more than a cheap one. Okay. And so these military ones that the EPA is using, those things get things 100 times more than mine. So that's what I'm talking about. It's this factor.
So instead of 2,500, they might be picking up, say, 100 or 150 and telling us.
Well, when I'm picking up 30, they may be picking up 3,000.
Oh my gosh!
It's sort of that kind of a scale. It really is.
Yeah, but how do we get an accurate reading? Then how do we know what the counts are per minute? The way they're doing it, it seems to me they're skewing the results. We're not finding out there's nowhere to find out. That's the big frustration. And okay, do I really want to spend $1,000 to find out what the radioactivity is in the air? Is that really what we need to do? I mean, it's not our responsibility to be. I know, but you know what? We spend billions of dollars on these facilities around our country. We have invested a lot. We have harmed a lot of children, given lots of people cancer knowingly. For us to not be able to get a decent reading and be told at least what the reading is, and let us determine for ourselves whether we feel safe or not, or what we're going to do. To me,
they don't like. Yeah, they don't like talking about it because there's some really dark, ugly secrets about it. You know, even stuff that I'm only being. I only have theories on right now about some of it. You know, and I think a lot of it has to do with how much of this radiation is in our upper atmosphere right now, and how saturated that is up there. And some of the stuff that I see from the EPA's graphs, I don't get stuff like that on my monitor, where it gets really high for hours at a time, and then will back off, and then get really high for hours again at a time. So something's going on here that I don't quite understand, and I haven't quite figured out. But I'm thinking that maybe this upper atmosphere stuff is getting sucked down by the high pressure systems. You know, when a big high comes over it starts really
and by
a lot
the rain,
of radiation down on
it comes down in the rain.
It can come down in the rain too. That tends to wash it out of the air, though.
You know what, though? This is the other thing, is the geoengineering. Actually, I was in class yesterday, and a teacher has said that the geoengineering is considered an environmental safety idea, because what they're attempting to do is put chemicals in the sky that will deflect the radioactivity from the sun, that will keep the carbon from creating the global climate change. So they're desperate. That's why they're desperately to me that does not make sense. Like putting poison in the air to save us from being polluted. Like it's unproven. You know what, Matt? We only have 30 seconds left. Thank you for joining us. You guys have been listening to Lonnie Clark and Matt Hulstrunk. Matt's a citizen scientist who measures radioactivity contamination in Corvallis. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
You're welcome, Lonnie.
I hope you return. Put your courage feet on, you guys. Take action. Lean into it, because it really is up to us if we're going to make it. Talk to you guys soon.
Hey, this is JJ Inc., and when I'm on planet Earth, I listen to UCY.TV.